The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 17. Caput Draconis, Vinca Major. 3 nights later, Draco found Hermione in the library and asked her to meet him in the astronomy tower at 9 that night. He was hesitant to send an owl to her. Apparently she'd received too many angry letters, and even howlers, after the Witch Weekly article accused her of vying for the affections of both Potter and Crumb. He even watched in horror one day when she opened a letter, and her hands had erupted into crusty boils, sending her running for the hospital wing. He knew she'd probably set fire to any letters she received now, out of precaution. He shivered in the cold end-of-February air, casting a quick warming charm that seemed to dissipate instantly. A sound like a shoe sliding on stone was his only warning before Hermione took off the invisibility cloak, stuffing it into a bag that looked to be on its last adventure, with how its seams bulged. He pulled her quickly into his arms, hungry for her touch after so long without it. "And where, exactly, Miss Granger, did you acquire such an exceptional invisibility cloak?" he murmured, taking a corner of it from where it hung errantly from the bag, and feeling its soft, glittery, silver texture for himself. He'd never tried one on, but he had seen his father's friend Jugson with one once. Jugson's was new, but still had a strange rippling effect, where the demi-geis hair was thinnest. This one wasn't made of hair, but also didn't seem to be simply imbued with a disillusionment charm. "It's Harry's." Hermione bit her lip as though afraid of what this news might reveal. "Potter has an invisibility cloak? Of course he does." Draco rolled his eyes, throwing his head back to silently curse the heavens. "Wait, is this how he got away with throwing mud at us at the Shrieking Shack that time?" Yes, possibly. And it may have been involved in a dragon delivery incident in first year that earned us all that detention with Hagrid in the Forbidden Forest," Hermione said reluctantly. "Merlin's bollocks," Draco muttered between his teeth. "Didn't you also say there was some kind of enchanted map?" "Never mind about that now." Hermione's teeth chattered. "It's cold. Why did you want to meet here?" Draco recognized and ignored the deflection. "For privacy." He took her hands, which were turning stiff in the cold wind, and pulled her away from the edge of the tower, closer to the wall. Here the wind was nearly gone, and his warming charm held fast when he cast it. "Ah, so much better," she drawled, bringing her cold fingers up to touch his neck. He jumped a mile at the icy touch, giving her a mock, admonishing look, to which she answered, "You said once that I could tickle you." He smiled. "You're right." He placed his nearly as cold fingers on her warm neck, bringing forth a small shriek from her that he swallowed with a sudden kiss. Leaning his forehead down to hers, he exhaled slowly. "I was worried about you. In the lake. Why didn't you tell me in advance?" "They told us only about 10 minutes before putting us under the stasis charm," she explained. "I'm sorry. I know you were probably a bit worried." "I was. More than a bit. Blaise knows. About us." "There's an us?" She peered guardedly up into his eyes. His breath huffed a cloud in the cold night air. I want there to be. I hope there is. Hope there can be." "But you don't know." "We're not even 15, Hermione." He hedged. "Actually, I am, you know," she joked, but then grew serious again. "But if we were 25, would you still be so unsure?" She stared into his eyes, finding the unspoken answer. "No, the reason you're not sure if there can be an us is because of my blood status." She dropped his hands and turned away from him. He felt the loss of warmth instantly. "Hermione, please understand." He touched her shoulder and turned her to face him, but she wouldn't look up. "This blood purity dragon shit, it's all I've known my whole life. I don't really believe in it. I don't want to be living it, but it's all I've been taught. It's taking me a bit of time to unlearn everything. And my mother and father, they have these plans for me. I don't want them, but before this, I didn't know what else there could be instead. Would you ever be able to tell your mother and father about me? She looked up to meet his eyes, and the unshed tears welled in them. My mother already knows. I think she's known for some time. She basically told me she knew at the World Cup, when I refused to stay put after my father left. I just had to go find you, warn you. But my father, I don't know. I don't think he would accept us. That being said, I don't have to accept him either. He heard her sharp intake of breath. I brought you something, he said, hoping to move the topic away from his father. Slipping her handkerchief from his pocket, he held it out to her. "Oh, thank you," she said with a mock curtsy and a watery smile. "Just what I've been missing. Actually, I improved it. Them, really." He withdrew his own from a different pocket, holding them out for her inspection, turning his to show her the tiny DM plus HG stitched on it. She held the original in her hand, and he held his own. "Vinca Major," he whispered to unlock his handkerchief, so that it could be written upon. "The Latin name for the periwinkle flower?" she breathed softly. "In pureblood society, flowers carry important meanings. In Victorian flower language, Vincas mean early friendship and pleasant recollections. Your first recollection of me might not be pleasant, but mine were of you," he said reverently. "I remember stepping into that train compartment and thinking you were the most gorgeous boy I'd ever seen that wasn't on television or in a magazine. Hermione, there weren't any boys on the A-team," he joked, reveling in her laughter. "Now, wait a moment." He spun away from her, holding his handkerchief to his mouth to block the wind and muffle his words. He looked down to confirm that his words were there in fresh ink, folded his square of fabric carefully, and gestured to hers. "What do I say?" she asked softly. "Caput Draconis." "Dragon's head, really?" She tilted her head at him teasingly. "It's also the head of the Draco constellation, you know," he said in his defense, pink rising in his cheeks as he realized the potential double entendre of the words. "It was also the first password we ever had into Gryffindor Tower," Hermione mused thoughtfully. "Proof that someone up there knows what they're doing, at least," he sniffed. She smiled, looking down at the words on the handkerchief for the first time. "The first time I saw your eyes, I knew they were my new favorite color." "Draco! My God, it works! This is amazing! But you told me in first year that your favorite color was golden brown. Oh." She paused, looking up at him, the tears spilling down her cheeks now. She surged forward for a long kiss, pressing herself fully against him. They stayed that way for some minutes, just relishing in the feel of each other as they pressed together. When they broke apart, he smiled, slightly dazed. "So, you like them?" "I love them, Draco. Tell me how they work," she insisted. He explained how the writing charm worked, and she turned away and wrote back, "Thank you for this. I love them." "And to erase them clean again?" she asked. For the locking passwords, he had decided that simple was best, choosing each other's last names. Because they only referred to each other by surnames, in the company of others, saying Malfoy or Granger meant that the handkerchiefs needed to be cleaned of their words. It was late, so they made their way to the bottom of the tower. She pulled out Potter's amazing invisibility cloak, once again, and they walked together under it to the top of the back staircase to the dungeons. He kissed her softly good-night for several minutes beneath the sheer silver curtain of the cloak, and ducked quickly into the shadows. As he watched, There was a small flash of her patent leather Mary Jane shoes there, for only a moment, and then nothing. He recalled with a disbelieving chuckle once again seeing only Potter's head floating in Hogsmeade that day, convinced for a brief moment that he'd raised some sort of spirit, or was imagining things. He'd been so annoyed and angry at the time. But now, when the cloak had helped him have a beautiful night with a beautiful witch, he found the memory a little funny. It had taken Hermione only 2 days to find ways of improving his handiwork. She wrote, "I think a colour-changing spell might be useful. You could make your words green, whilst mine would be red. The incantation is Equiturius Colovaria Verde." It had worked. At a glance, he was able to find her red letters on the page, even amidst his own green at the times when their words were said so quickly back and forth. A couple of days later she wrote, "I hate that I don't know when to check the note. Sometimes I won't see it for hours, and I wish I'd known sooner." She had written only an hour later, "I thought of the solution in History of Magic. Try the spell Nova Tempus Calidium." He was surprised a few moments later in the boys' loo, when the handkerchief suddenly felt warm in his pocket, as though it had been lying in the sun. Did it work? He smiled to himself at both her intellect and her eagerness. "Of course it did, witch. You're too brilliant for the likes of me." She wrote back, "Next try the incantation Voir Tempus Frigidium." She hadn't explained this one, and he wondered what was in store. He wrote, "All right, it's done. What does it do?" In an instant the cloth turned cool to the touch, as though it had been dropped in a snowbank. A moment later it grew warm again. "Warm means you have a new message to see, but cold means that your message has been seen by the other person." "That's amazing, Hermione. You make swottiness so hot." He hurried out of the lab after washing his hands, making his way to the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. Moody and his roving, freakish eyeball met him in the doorway, just as he was closing the door. "Mr. Malfoy, you're very nearly late, and your robe pocket is overheating." Professor Moody clipped at him as he entered. Draco narrowed his eyes at the Gryffindors, finding the one he most particularly wanted to see. "My apologies, sir," he said as he sat down, his eyes meeting hers sternly as she tried not to laugh. Vince and Greg were up to something. They'd been sneaking off and acting weird for a few weeks now, really, since Christmas. At first Draco thought maybe one of them had a girlfriend, or perhaps they were each other's boyfriends, but he wasn't sure. None of that seemed likely. After Hermione had told the Slytherins off over the latest Rita Skeeter article, they'd rushed out of potions at a speed Draco hadn't known they could reach. It was like they'd heard that Honeydukes was free for the next 10 minutes or something. Draco watched them rumble up the stairs from the dungeons faster than anyone else, reaching the top step to see Vince's generous backside disappearing through the front door. What was that about? The ridiculous articles and mean letters and howlers continued. Hermione wrote, "I'm starting to be fearful of post time, not knowing what's coming next. Rita seems to have eyes all over the school. She somehow knew that Victor invited me to visit him in Bulgaria this summer." He responded almost as soon as the handkerchief had turned warm. "Victor did what? What did you say? Are you going to visit him?" She answered, "Honestly, you sound like Ron." "Don't compare me to the weasel, Hermione. And you didn't answer my question." After a few moments, she put him out of his misery by answering, "I just told him thank you, but perhaps it was best if we just wrote letters to each other instead, for now." Cool relief overcame him. He replied, "Well, the purpose of the tournament is to foster good international relations and goodwill between our schools, I suppose. A pen friend is nice." But privately he had to admit that the weasel was 100% right on this. One afternoon, after an even stranger than usual divination class in which Potter had fainted and ran off pretending his head hurt, Vince had asked him to take a walk with him and Greg to recount the story. They weren't in divination and hadn't seen it happen. "Why?" Draco asked flatly. He had homework, plus Theo and Blaise had asked if he wanted to go flying before dinner. Plus he had hoped to see Hermione in the library that night. Spending half an hour with Vince and Greg swapping stories about Potter was not his idea of a good time. "We just think it's a funny story, and we want to hear it," Greg offered. Vince laughed in a stupid sort of way. "Can't I just tell you at dinner?" he asked. "No," Greg sighed, rolling his eyes. "Look, it's nice weather. Let's take a walk," Vince cajoled him. "Why?" He narrowed his eyes at him. Greg occasionally tried to join him for a light jog or lifting weights. Draco had even gotten him flying a few times, and Greg was getting much better. He might even shape up into a decent beater, eventually. But if Vince didn't live in a castle with 142 staircases, Draco was sure he'd never climb stairs if given the choice. "Just come on, mate." Vince half pulled, half pushed him out the front doors. They walked along the winding path towards the lake, reaching a small copse of trees. Draco began the story, embellishing where it dragged, making himself sound like a good student who'd been paying attention and earning praise from Trelawney, despite the fact that he'd been daydreaming about Granger in that periwinkle dress. "And Potter claimed he needed a headache cure," Greg asked. "How'd you know that? Class just ended 10 minutes ago. Who told you?" I just thought he would, is all," Greg stammered. Draco shrugged. Yeah, that's right. That's about it. Just Potter being weird as usual," he said. He turned as though to go back to the castle, and his eye caught on a shiny green beetle sitting on a branch near his head. "Huh, look at this beetle. I've never seen one like this," he said, scooping it into his hands. "Be careful with it," Vince gruffed in an almost angry voice. "I just want to look at it. What's the harm?" Draco said snidely. Since when had Crabbe become an animal activist? This was the same boy he'd seen swallow a salamander on a dare earlier this year. The beetle began crawling quickly up his arm and towards his neck, as though it was racing towards his ear. "Merlin, what the hell? Where do you think you're going?" he muttered, cupping the escaping beetle in his hands and depositing it on the ground. "What a weird bug." Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great78.